Joining us today is David Wolfe. He's had a lengthy career in strategy and operations in both the public and private sector. And we came across each other on LinkedIn, and I found him fascinating. So I wanted to get him on this to talk about himself and how he sees things and highlight him a little bit on our ConnectToWork podcast here. So, David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we'll get right to the questions. What moment in your career has taught you the most?
I would say actually COVID. That's where it really tests your resolve as a person. I live in New York City, so the lockdowns were much more severe than most places. And I was starting a business at the time, right when it launched. So it really tested resolve and positivity and how to bring people together, how to be a leader, how to keep people positive. I had some employees that were here in New York City, and I watched it really be debilitating to them that they were locked in their apartments. And I had some that were not and were a little more free and mobile to move. They lived in the South. But it really taught me about having a good attitude and being positive and staying positive and how to bring people together. And we'll get through this, and let's just roll up our sleeves and get through it.
That's a great answer. It was a challenging time. Tara and I were in Ireland at the time, and it was a surreal experience. I'm sure, it was a surreal experience everywhere, but they were so tight about you couldn't move more than 2 kilometers from your house, even when they started to let people out of the house, and only 3 people in the backyard. And it was amazing.
Oh, in New York City, we
what
could
they
be
did.
fined $1,500 if we were not an essential
Wow.
worker and we were caught on a train or something. So I would have to walk to the grocery store and stuff like that.
But it was a learning experience, and I think some people learn the lessons better than others.
Yeah.
We'll leave
That's
that
a good
alone.
point.
Yeah. I didn't mean to go into a bad time, but when you
No,
ask about
no.
learning the most, that was a learning.
Exactly.
If people didn't learn from that, I don't know what they.
Right. So, David, when colleagues or team members describe you, what are 3 things that they reference the most about you?
I would say bringing people together, empathetic, and leading by example. I was a former world-class athlete, so I was brought up with the mantra first in, last out. First person into the office, last one to leave. Keep a very positive attitude. Enthusiasm is infectious. And the one that really stuck with me was don't be a bullfrog, because bullfrogs have a tendency to just sit on their lily pad.
Okay.
And one of my main coaches, Mark Sprague Sr., used to play these Zig Ziglar motivational tapes, which may seem odd that he's playing this for 10 to 18-year-old kids training for national tournaments. They're like, what does Zig Ziglar business motivation speeches and songs have to do with training for a national wrestling tournament? But in the end, it actually resonated with all of us.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go out on the mat and he could say to us, don't be a bullfrog, and it would fire us up, So it's interesting.
That's great. I was going to say, what was the sport that you chose? But now I understand it's wrestling.
Yeah.
Tara was a world-class athlete back in her day as well. She was a sailor.
Wow.
So a little different. But wrestling that's a demanding sport.
So sailing.
Well,
True.
it's funny. One of our best heavies on the team, because you would have your regular crew and then you'd have some heavies when there was heavy weather. One of our best heavies was a world-class wrestler. So
Perseverance.
we employed them. Yep. And just core strength.
Yep.
So,
Yep. All right. Outside of professional achievements, what passion project or personal interest has taught you skills that make you better at what you do?
I would say coaching. I never really viewed that because it was never anything that I wanted to do. It is something that I did, but I don't necessarily look at it as a professional something I did. But it really taught me how to empathize because I had so much success. I had to step out of who I was and how I drove myself and how can I motivate others who are not on that same level, not on that same rung, didn't have those same goals, but how can I help them achieve and get the most out of it that they can? Because in the end, it was teaching me I'm not building better athletes, I'm building better humans. And so what I wanted it to do was, and especially a sport like wrestling, I wanted it to translate to their daily lives. So going back to your example with your heavy was a world-class athlete wrestler, that person understood perseverance and how to overcome and how to do those achievements. People would see it as like a fighting sport or something like that. But my closest friends are former world class athletes. And other than those who have actually literally stepped in an octagon or a ring, and I do have those friends, but it never went off of the mat. My closest competitors were also my best friends who I worked out with. We would shake hands, we would love each other, but when they blew the whistle, they blew the whistle. But the biggest learning thing was just
Great answer.
Great answer. And since you brought up coaching, now we're going to talk about one of your favorite mentors. It can be personal or professional.
I would go back to the person I mentioned originally, which was Mark Sprague Sr., who's still among us. He's still upright. He's in his late 80s and still coaching.
Good for him.
But he's in the Hall of Fame and things like that. He was not a competitor. He was just someone who caught an interest in it, got his older son into it, and then just mastered it. But what he really was a master motivator and how to identify with people. And sometimes you would misunderstand what he was doing because obviously he could get really intense, especially if you're training for something serious. But he had this mantra of infectious enthusiasm and the collective mindset that if we're all focused on the task at hand together and we're all actively listening, then we're all learning together and we can all progress together. And that is something, going back to applying it to my professional life and my life in general. That's something that has always resonated and stuck with me just because, and everybody I know that I grew up with that was on his team and anybody who's crossed his path, that's always the one thing they always bring up is just the way he could you felt like you could walk through a wall. But when I was coaching for him, I was also selling club memberships because our wrestling club was in his athletic club.
Okay.
I wasn't a salesperson. I was an athlete. It was one of those jobs, if you're training for the Olympic Games, like you needed a day job, for example, and he wasn't going to pay me enough to coach the program. So I had to make money elsewhere. So my best sales days were the days I would meet with him one-on-one. And he would motivate me, but he didn't talk to me about sales techniques. He didn't talk to me about these things. He just talked to me and motivated me and knew what my strengths were and how to tap into that and how I could walk out and identify and work with the people who I was going to have to deal with. Now, obviously, I'm selling athletic club memberships, and some of my methods were not. I was in my early 20s, so it might not have been the best thing, like taking a person who was overweight and sticking them in front of a mirror and being like, "Hey, look at yourself." And that doesn't really work. And he's what happened. I was like, he was so mad he signed up for a membership. But he was like, "That's not motivating. Don't do that." And that's why I say that. He would take a success, but then point out like, "Hey, here's how you can improve on that." But he would tie it back to, would you do that to someone on the street? Would you do that to one of your friends? No. Then why would you do that to that person? That's not, do you see what I mean? He's not a world-class athlete. You can't view everyone that they can get to where you are. No one's going to work out for 8 hours a day. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
He, to this day, and someone that I still talk to that I will call up, I will talk to him if I just need that little push. And he does it, but he does it in a way that I like to say he taught me how to micromanage without people feeling like they're being micromanaged. That they're driving the car even though you're in a self-driving car. Do you understand what I mean? Like
I do.
I know that micromanagement can be an ugly word, but there's a way of keeping on top of people, because if you're doing that, you're going to find those areas for them to improve and they don't feel the pressure of you doing that or that they have to. You find a way to motivate them to get through whatever obstacles they have.
Yeah. It's truly a coaching perspective, though, because you are supposed to find the weaknesses in your team and then, have them rise up. So
maybe that's why I was
a coaching
operations
mentality,
and strategy.
right? Yeah, there you go. And the other thing that I kept hearing through, but you didn't say, was integrity. He taught you integrity. Like, don't do that. Don't do something that you wouldn't do to your own friend.
Yes.
So that's really lovely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that was just really well done. So I'll just leave it there. But what book or podcast has influenced you?
A book I would say is a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness by the Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and which is it. It can be totally random for some, and it totally was for me at the time. I was taking it was when I was going to school. I had left to train, and then I went back to college after I tried to train to make a team. Um, and I took this Religions of India course, and we had to keep a meditation journal, and the miracle of mindfulness is like this introduction into meditation, and I still read it. I still read the lessons in it. I'm not a Zen Buddhist, but it grounds me, it focuses me, it keeps me positive, and it makes me realize like what matters, and that water's still wet and the sky's still blue and the sun's still shining. At least today it is. And that book had a lot to do with it. I would say the main pod, to be honest, the main podcast I listen to is Tony Hawk's podcast, but that has to do with my daughter's a sponsored skateboarder. But he has so many lessons in there of what he had to overcome, and his co-host Jason Ellis, what they had to overcome, and the same with their guests, that it may look like, oh, I became this superstar and I became all of this, but learning from him on how to help her because
Mm-hmm.
she's trying to go bigger and bigger. And look, having been a world-class athlete, having been a coach, I now understand what it's like to be a parent who has a gifted child, and how not to be that parent. Like, I'm not my child, and I'm not going to achieve dreams through my child. So how to
Mm-hmm.
motivate her without pushing her too far,
Hmm.
Right.
especially in something like this, because you go horribly wrong. But but it is helpful though, and it's an out of the box thing to listen to. But believe it or not, I get a lot of lessons out of that podcast.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
All right. So then, next question. If you could spend a day learning from someone, anyone historically alive, dead, whatever, who would that be and why?
I've thought about this one quite a bit.
I mean, you're all over the map. It could be Tony Hawk. It could be a Buddhist monk,
And
Zig
it's
Ziglar. I don't know where you're going to go.
yeah, no, I understand. Um, to be honest, it would be the late Dave Schultz.
Mm.
He's and for me personally, he's the greatest American wrestler ever. He didn't win as many world titles. He only won one Olympic title in '84. He was shot and killed by John DuPont back in '95, I believe it was. If you saw the movie
Mm.
Foxcatcher, that's who it's about.
Mm-hmm.
I got a chance to be around Dave, but I was an up and coming athlete at that time. Um, and he steered me of, you don't want to be at college, you want to train for this, then why don't you go train for this? College is going to be there, and resonated with me. He just, he's someone that I always, being able to, if I could sit down and talk with someone on the trials and tribulations that I've gone through post COVID and things
Mm-hmm.
like that, is very helpful because he is that mixture of Tony Hawk and the Zen Buddhist monk. And anybody from the sport who came across his path and stuff like that, that was him. That's who he was. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting mentioning the movie Foxcatcher because Foxcatcher is actually supposed to be about his brother Mark, but it's more about Dave because Dave is the one who gets shot and killed, and how everyone gravitated towards him and the tragedy of that. But it is actually Mark's book of his own story, who's also a great guy. But
Mm-hmm.
Dave Schultz is someone that for me personally, like, I would always, and my friends who are closest to him that are older, I will reach out to them sometimes and be like, what would Dave say in this moment? If
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming to a challenge or something like that, what would Dave tell you? And the reason I ask them that, it's not a question from because he was their coach, it's because he was their friend. And they had their own challenges in life. And they know that's what I'm asking, that I'm not asking from a former athlete's point of view. It's asking, how do you think he would have approached this, including his wife, Nancy? How do you think he would have approached, or I should say his widow, Nancy? How would you approach this? How would he approach this? So it's always those things that just keep you motivated, keep you positive. Don't dwell
Mm-hmm.
on anything negative that's happened. Things happen. And we can't deny that things have happened, but we have to learn from them and move on and not dwell. And that's the reason. But that's also one of the reasons why I would talk to him, because like I said, to me, he's the GOAT, but he didn't win as much. And that's the thing.
Interesting. Well, coming back to business,
Mhm.
what do you see as the future of your industry?
I think it's going to have to be a marriage as AI creeps in, how we adapt ourselves to that. I don't believe we can fight it. I'm Gen X, so I had a rotary dial phone growing up. I remember playing Pong on an Atari with just that thing that went like that. I remember my dad getting the first Commodore 64 and learning to code on that. I'm not a coder, but I used to be able to write DOS and build video games because that's how I played video games when I was a kid, because they were better than Atari. Um, but that's where I see, and especially within operations and strategy, like instead of looking at AI and technology as a means of replacement, it needs to be viewed as a means of enhancement. Um, it can free you up to focus on things that AI can't do. Unsupervised learning is not something that we're not there yet. And I have a feeling that even people who are trying to work on those sorts of things still want to put guardrails on unsupervised learning because nobody wants to build a Terminator. I think that is what I think the biggest changes are, and who adapts and who doesn't. As I mentioned, I'm not a coder or an engineer, but I think that it takes someone in an operational and strategy point of view that at the end of the day in business, the human being is on the end of that cord. And so we have to be able to structure it to that and be mindful of that, and not just view things as automation can replace this, or automation may be the main thing that builds cars, but you still have people in there doing it. Do you understand what I mean? It might not be as many, but my point is you're people cannot be replaced. And so I think we have this fight or flight mentality. And so I think it's something that we need to embrace, and we just need to learn what tools work and what tools don't. And don't be so knee jerk to jump at the bright, shiny object that comes out, because as someone who worked with one of the top AI developers in the world, NEC Corporation, they built a lot of great AI, but it's not universally works. So the application needs to be strategically placed and not viewed as, oh, this is going to make it so I don't have to have X, Y, and Z. No, you still need X, Y, and Z, because human nature and human intuition is not something that a non-sentient being is ever going to be able to understand. I don't care how great you think your algorithm is.
I agree.
Yep. I think you need the X and the Y so that you have both the male and the female genes,
Agreed. Completely agree.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I had to throw in my
No, 100%. When I was starting my company, and like I told you guys earlier, it was going into COVID, things like that. But I made it a point hiring female engineers, and people were asking me, why do you do that? I'm like, just in my experience of working in both offices in the state of New York or a leading tech company here in New York City that was putting in Wi-Fi across the city, those were our best engineers. And frankly speaking, the easiest to work with, because the lines of communication were not blurred. The ego was not there. And I don't like to lead with, I just don't like, I can't say that I don't have an ego. I was a world-class athlete. I trained. In this setting, I don't view things as top down. I learned that in the public sector that I'm not the biggest fan. I don't believe that top down always works, that you need to listen to who's under here. And I just found that communications were actually pretty seamless in that regard, that I could get a straight answer without someone worrying that they're going to get chastised or feel like they're failing, because that wasn't how I operated. So I didn't have to worry about not getting the truth, because the ego patterns were not there that would lead to something like that.
Very interesting.
Not to denigrate my own gender, but
To me, I think it's a mix. You need a mixture, and I think there's so many talented women in technology, in coding, in engineering. It's not that, in my opinion, it's not that they're better, but they're different, and they bring a different perspective.
Right.
They're at least as talented, and a lot of times they bring a little bit more creativity than some men do. But there's a need for both.
I agree.
Um,
I completely
Yeah.
agree. And it's not like I was hiring only females. I had a mixture of both.
Right.
No, I
I did have a
understand.
Yeah.
mixture of both. When I was coming in as well, having been in places and dealt with IT teams and things like that, I did not see that balance. And so I had made it a point that I was going to have that balance. So that's pretty much it.
It's important
Good
because
on
there
you.
isn't a balance.
Yeah.
Exactly. There is not a balance yet. So it is great that people do focus on that.
Yes.
So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Obviously it shows off a lot about who you are, your character, your intelligence, your background. So I hope this is helpful. If somebody wants to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can?
I would say either LinkedIn or my email.
Mhm. Okay.
I get so many. I don't answer my phone a lot because 99% of the time my phone rings, it's not someone I care to talk to. It's usually some kind of telemarketer or salesperson or something. And and it's frustrating because when it
Mhm.
doesn't say potential spam, I'm like, should I answer this? And then when I answer it, I hear this bloop.
Mhm.
And then I'm just like, oh, so you are that. Because as soon as you hear that noise and you get
Right.
clicked onto the line, it's, oh, you took yourself off of mute. You're sitting there with a headset. So now you're going to try to sell me something. No, thank you. So email, LinkedIn, I do always respond if I believe it's true. LinkedIn
Sure.
has also had that issue of a lot of people
Uh-huh.
reaching out, pretending to be something they're not. And then they're
Mhm.
trying to sell me a service. And I'm just like, I told you at the very beginning of this conversation, if you're here to sell me something, just stop now.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is amazing. It is amazing. But we'll include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and your email. So anybody that wants to get in touch with you, they can. This has been great. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope this helps.
Thank you very much. I
It was
appreciate
a
it.
pleasure to meet you.
You too.
MTMG, guidance that empowers.